Hi guys, Charles here and welcome back to my channel. Bebop was the nonsensical name given to the style of jazz emerging in the late 1930s through to the 1940s in the United States. It was based off the scat singing of vocalists. However, the musicians themselves called the style modern. In this video, I'm going to share with you 5 little tips to make your lines sound a bit more bebop-y. However, I want to say up front that there is no better way than simply immersing yourself in the music of Bud Powell, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, amongst many, many other great players. I'm simply sharing with you 5 little time savers that might help you pick these sounds out when you're listening to the music, but immersing yourself in that sound world really is the most important thing. So the first thing that you need to get to grips with to play bebop might not be a huge surprise for you here, it's the bebop scale. Now all the bebop scale is, it's a family of scales which have an additional note added to them. Where you add that note depends on the specific scale and it depends on the context of the line, but for today we're just going to look at the major bebop scale, where we're adding an extra note between the 5th and the 6th of the major scale. So you can think of it as a sharp 5 or a flat 6. I think flat 6 is probably a bit closer to the way this note actually functions, but if you prefer sharp 5, that's absolutely fine. So in the scale of D major, we will be adding that flat 6 between the note A and the note B, which gives us the note B flat. The purpose of the bebop scale is to ensure that the following bar begins on a chord tone. If we don't play the flat 6th and we just play a normal major scale, the next bar starts on the note E. That's important to know because you might want to start the next bar on E. For example, if the chord was changing to an E minor, then you wouldn't play the bebop scale because it gets you where you want it to be. If, however, we want to stay on the note D, it resolves really nicely. We can also use the diminished scale because any 8-note scale is going to resolve onto itself. So make sure you use the diminished scale a lot in bebop playing as well. The next little trick is to add semi-quaver triplets or 16th note triplets. Bebop is constant 8th notes or constant quavers which are swinging. Da 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 da. To break up that monotony, a really easy way to do that is to add in double speed triplets. Da ba da la ba 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 da la ba 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 da la ba ba. That sort of thing. So in the second bar of the lick, we've added a little triplet trill almost, just to break up the monotony of the 8th notes. So just adding in that little triplet wherever you can. Don't overdo it obviously, but it's actually very difficult to overdo it. It's something that you want to throw in there quite frequently just to break your line up and keep the rhythm a bit more interesting. Thirdly, superimposed arpeggios. So most of the time in bebop, and everything I'm talking about today of course is just generalizations, these are just things that often happen. Most of the time the arpeggio work is stuck on a root 3rd, 5th, 7th position arpeggio. So we like to keep in bebop a close arpeggio where we're always moving in thirds. Now, the other thing they do a lot in bebop is play with what we call the upper extensions of the chord. So we like to use 9ths in particular, 13ths as well, and 11s occasionally depending on the chord type. So in order to fulfill both of those criteria, an arpeggio built in thirds and using upper extensions, what we do is we build that arpeggio of thirds on a different scale degree. So for a clear example, let's say we were in the key of C. A major 7 arpeggio would look like this. Now if instead I was to play an E minor 7 arpeggio, I added the 9th degree relative to the C. So by playing different arpeggios over certain chord types, you can highlight different degrees of the chord. Now, back to our example. I've played a descending B minor 7 arpeggio. So we started after our little trill, we were on a C sharp there. We essentially just descended through a D major 7 arpeggio, but I kept on going an extra third, which takes me down to B. So we've got kind of B minor 9 sound, which in the context of D is the 13th. So we've got D major 13. But we'd think of it as a B minor 7 structure superimposed on that D chord. So we've talked about the bebop scale and we've talked about arpeggios. It's worth saying that we very often in bebop ascend or descend through a scale and then do the opposite via an arpeggio. So if you climb up through a bebop scale, it's very common to then descend through an arpeggio. Or if you go up through an arpeggio, it's very common to then descend through the bebop scale. So playing with ascending through one medium and descending through the other is a great way to start to dip your toe into that bebop sound world. Number 4 is encirclement. Now, encirclement is whichever note you want to get to, you approach it from, in any order, a note below and a note above. So for example, if I was playing an A major arpeggio, I could go, and each of those notes was approached from a note below, then a note above, and then landing on the note. So we're encircling that particular target note. Now, you can encircle chromatically or you can encircle diatonically. So that same A major arpeggio, if I was in the key of A major, might sound like this. And that's the approach I've taken in this lick. So in my lick here, we're doing that by going, I'm wanting to get to this F sharp, and I've gone E, which is the note below, G, the note above, to get me to the note I want, F sharp. Nice simple encirclement diatonically. The final trick here is using the tritone. Now, I also happen to have used a sequence here, which we talked about in a previous video. You can see up here. Now, a tritone substitution is the go-to trick for bebop players to get that outside sound. Again, we discussed this in a huge amount of detail in the Family of 4 video, which you can see up here. And at this point, of course, I would just reference that one of the greatest bebop teachers of all time, who we discussed in that video, Mr. Barry Harris, he himself lived through the bebop era, played with all the guys, and he's really mastered the teaching methods, the pedagogy, I think is the correct word, of bebop. So do put his name into YouTube, search Barry Harris and watch those original videos by Hans, whatever his name is. And the Things I Learned from Barry Harris channel is a brilliant channel as well. And then a guy called Isaac Graz. I'll tag them down below so you can check their channels out. Those guys have actually studied with Barry Harris and they really know their stuff. So do check those guys out. So in this instance, my tritone substitution is on the 2 of the 5 chord. So we're in the key of D, so the 2 is going to be E minor. So we've just played this little cell on E minor, which is 5th, 7, root, 3rd. So what's the tritone substitution of E? Well, it's B flat. So I'm going to play 5th, 7, root, 3rd in B flat. And that resolves up nicely to the tonic. So don't work too hard. If you've already come up with a cell, then modulate it, transpose it, use it on a tritone. Make it last longer. If it's good enough to play once, it's good enough to play 2 or 3 times. So hopefully you found those tips useful and you can start to use those in your own playing. The most important thing for any style of jazz, and actually any style of music in general, is it needs to swing. Now, different styles of music define swing differently. So of course, how a classical player swings, it's how you interpret the sense of time. But for bebop and jazz players, we often think of that with this kind of off-kilter triplet, which is the closest thing that we can sort of approximate it with. But you just got to get the sound in your ears by listening. And as long as it's swinging, that really is the most important thing. And all these extra tricks are just a little bit of icing on the cake. Please do let me know down below in the comments any of your own bebop tips and whether you'll be doing a bit of work on your bebop playing this week. Please do click that like button, subscribe, ding the notification bell, and share with any of your friends who need to up their bebop game. And as always, I hope you're all doing very well, getting plenty of practice in, and I very much look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers!
Roll up, let me embed a story you'll never forget. A drip, drip, you're drowning in debt now. You can't buy your way out, and I heard you find it difficult to cope well. Here by this bottle full of hope.